And after the 5th of what would become 8 days of the deathbed, I realized something. Not everyone can come to Christ in the fullness of life, while the world, the flesh, and the devil are raging and strong. But anyone led by the Spirit can come to Christ on the deathbed when the flesh is weak. Anyone, even my mother. But who will lead the way? Who will proclaim the fullness of Christ in the presence of this weakness? If you are not at the deathbed, you can't offer hospitality. Hospitality always requires hands and heads and hearts, and mess and sacrifice and weakness, always. An excerpt from The Gospel Comes with a House Key by Rosaria Butterfield.
Welcome back to Bright Hearth Podcast. I am Brian Sauvé here with my lovely wife, Lexy Sauvé. This time, sadly, I have to tell you that Winnie is not present with us.
Sophie's brave. She's got all 5 kids. I don't know if anyone's ever had all 5 kids awake.
Yeah, all awake at the same time. So we are here walking through the the rooms of the house, talking about recovering the lost arts of productive householdery. What's the word that we've been using, actually? The productive household and the lost arts of domesticity, the domestic arts is
homemaking.
What I'm
lost
looking
arts
for.
of homemaking.
Homemaking.
Wow.
I forgot that word. I said householdery. Well, this is off to a great start. Well, we're in the bedroom again, but we're taking a completely different turn here because as you probably heard from that excerpt from Rosaria Butterfield's book talking about the conversion of her mother, which was a fairly radical conversion based on her life before that, in the last days of her life, literally as Rosaria, as her daughter, helped her to die, basically. So we're talking about deathbed hospitality. We're talking about dying well. We have, in the bedroom, talked about making babies. We've talked about having babies at this point, midwifery and, the arts of homemaking related to the birth of children and welcoming new babies and the hospitality that comes into that. But it's also essential that Christians understand that part of the arts of homemaking, because the home is for the people, will include everything that people do and everything that people walk through. And one of those things that we have also lost is the ability to die well, and specifically to care for those who are dying and help those who are dying well. There are huge industries in America today and in the world today that basically have removed death from our sight, where often we want to take death, we want to get it away from us. People don't like contemplating death, memento mori. We don't like making eye contact with the fact that all of us are going to die. Our culture is weighed down with sin and guilt, and it is absolutely terrified of death because it has no peace with God. And so in that world, Christians ought to be those who are demonstrating how to not just live well and love one another in life well, but also to die well. And so today we're going to be talking about hospitality related to the deathbed, how the home, the Christian home, can facilitate death in a Christian way. And just a couple of disclaimers here up front. We're not, sometimes there are situations we're going to talk about dying in the home. And, there are situations where people are going to die outside of the home in circumstances that are
unexpectedly.
Unexpected.
Ecclesiastes says we don't know the time of her
right.
death.
So we're going to set up a normative picture that we are aiming for, but don't take this as a condemnation if you had my parents died in the hospital. I had nothing, no control over it. Or
I think too, as we talk a little bit about our experiences, we're no strangers to people wanting to resist this, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So what we're aiming to do in this podcast is to sort of flesh out an ideal scenario and situation we can all be aiming for and building together, understanding that some of these things are not going to be in our control. And some of these things are their advice that we're giving you now. Maybe a lot of you are younger, 30s, 20s, 40s, and you're looking upstream at your parents or your grandparents, and maybe they don't have the same values or culture. And so maybe you would love to do some of these things, but it's out of your hands. You want to honor them, and you're not going to force them to listen to your culture. But hopefully these can serve as reminders for you now to set your life up and instruct your children so that when your time comes, Lord willing, it's a long time from now, but when your time comes, that you will be able to have established this. So these are all long things that you're going to be looking way, way ahead with and aiming your life at. But the first thing that we wanted to talk about was really just, in general, why ought Christians to die differently? Like, do we have scriptural examples of people dying with dignity? How would that, what would be a peculiarly Christian vision for deathbed hospitality? Why would we take this topic up?
I really like the book that kind of introduced me to this topic in scripture specifically is from Pursuing Health in an Anxious Age by Bob Coutillo, I think is how you say it. I read this a number of years ago. I don't know if I would agree with everything he has to say specifically about wealth and use of money, so I'm just giving that disclaimer. But I do think it's an excellent book, definitely worth reading. But he talks in here, he says, the counterintuitive message of the resurrection is that the path to life is through death. Other narratives that would fulfill our desire for immortality by avoiding death leave the power of death unbroken and the fear of death intact. Only through the acceptance of death can death be defeated. He gives multiple examples from scripture, but the one I remember specifically is of Moses. It seemed as if this book is really interesting because he kind of paints a picture for like numbing, as we're coming to the end of our days, we're numbing ourselves to death with medicine because we've over-medicalized it. But you have someone like Moses who is so in touch with the Lord that he seemed to know the moment was coming, and he was, I think scripture even uses a phrase, he gave up his spirit. I don't know if that's in every translation, but I just remember that picture that he gave of Moses like giving himself over to death. And there were multiple other examples. I tried to find them today. He did give other examples from scripture, but I just walked away from that just realizing we have numbed ourselves to the power, like we can will ourselves to die. We know this because old couples die within a matter of days of one another because they have broken hearts. There seems to be something there with our humanity and our soul and our spirit. And I think the old Christians in the medieval times would have called it our vitality even. But just the fact that we can will and choose to lay our life down and to hold on to our life. Another example that came to mind too is in Death by Living by Nate. He was talking about, I think it was one of his grandfathers that it was some older family member of his who was like having a heart attack, and somebody else walked in on him and was like trying to stop them essentially from dying. And they said, no, like, I know this is the time. So I just think there's a whole lot of like humanity that we've lost because we exile the dying person to the nursing home or to the hospital, and they're out of the home environment for, some good reasons. I think a lot of bad reasons, though, because we're so terrified of judgment and death in general, what comes after that, or lack of knowing what comes after that. We want to prolong it artificially for as long as possible, but only the Christian can die with dignity because we know that what comes after death is the resurrection. So it should change entirely the way we view this for ourselves when we die, the way we view our loved ones who are Christians as they're dying and the way we want to care for them, and the way we view our unbelieving family members that would allow us to care for them and love them in this way.
Yeah, it even says that Moses was gathered to his people, which is, I think, an important way that they thought about death that we didn't necessarily think about death. Being gathered to your people, that this is like you are part of the story of a people, and you had a beginning in that story, your birth, your conception and your birth, and then you will be gathered to your people, and you'll be awaiting the resurrection with them, knowing that your line will continue on, hopefully in faithfulness to God, that He delights to show his faithfulness to your children and their children's children to the 1,000th generation, as we see those promises in the scriptures, that God delights to work through families and through these normative means. And so it is important that Christians begin with the presupposition that we don't have to just do everything the world is doing.
No.
We don't have to just, okay, this is how people handle death. We go to a hospital, we go to end-of-life care, whatever it is. We as Christians ought to begin with the presupposition that there are things that we know because of what we believe is true that will change and inform the way that we approach the end of our life because of gospel hope.
That, and I really just think this is normative only in America and only the last couple decades.
Yeah, modernity, probably even more than just America, probably more modernity, the culture of convenience and the culture of, basically where we've said we're going to export every aspect of our lives to experts in different fields instead of being competent in being humans we have people that do everything for us in all these different areas of our life.
Yeah.
Instead, we could give the example of food. Most people, they have no idea where food comes from. They just, we get food. That's what we do. But so much of the arts of Christian homemaking are going to relate to basically reverse engineering, understanding who people are, what people are for, what people need and have been designed to need, and how the home is this huge part of God's design, particularly the woman in the home being the hub of these needs being met and seen to in hospitality and in love. So I think one of the biggest aspects of this that we've already touched on several times that is worth noting again is that, obviously when we're talking about the household here in these arts, it's pretty clear that we're not just talking about this 2-generation house where you have parents and kids.
Yeah.
But that what we're aiming for really, a lot of this has to do with intergenerational living.
Yeah, I think
context.
As I've been thinking about this today in preparation for this, I was just really realized at how many opportunities in my life I have been able to live in intergenerational situations with grandparents on both sides. And that's because of the military. I was even just telling you, my grandfather died of cancer in his bed, and I slept there the next night beside my grandma until we moved out. And, similar situations where we'd move in with my dad's grandma on the other side, which is that's 4 generations in one household. Yeah. And I know that's not normative for most people, but I was just thinking about how as a child, like as a mom now, I kind of stress out about the details of what does that look like with family life and how would that work? But as a child reflecting on it, those were some of the best times of my life. Yeah. Like the most enriching times of my childhood, the most, if you guys have heard me talk about nostalgia in other places, the most nostalgia giving times of my childhood that deeply shaped who I am as an adult now. So I think, did you ask me a question or am I just talking at this point?
You're good. Okay.
I have been thinking a lot about how as a woman, as the homemaker, your job has to be oriented towards people, towards obeying scripture and towards people. Because if you're just staying home while the kids are little and the second they're in school, you're out of there, you're not going to be available for some of these other end-of-life lost arts of homemaking that will take place when you are an older woman. You're just not going to be available. So I just have been thinking so much about how my schedule, as I get older, as my parents get older, I need to remain available, which means I need to be home. I need to still be homeward centered, even if, some of the hustle and bustle is elsewhere because my kids are elsewhere.
Did you know that you can support the show and get a great t-shirt that also encourages everyone who sees you to feed the patriarchy? Yes, you can do all of that actually at the same time. Head to briansauvé.com/bright-hearth. And there on the website, we have a store where you can buy a Rosie the Riveter t-shirt that says, "Do your part, feed the patriarchy," and some other great merch that supports this show, helps Lexi and I continue to make this show. Every time we record, we have to pay a babysitter for an hour or two to sit down with our kids and make sure that they don't come and unplug the soundboard while we're recording. So head over there, check it out, and we would hope to outfit you to offend everybody around you and also support the patriarchy at the same time.
So I just think that's so important because I think moms are so quick to rush out nowadays and to get a job, and that's kind of it. And then they come along, their grandkids come along, and they're not accessible. They're just, they say they are, but there's a body language there too, though, that when they're showing up to punch in to work instead of, just showing up at your house unexpectedly with helping hands, so it's just different. But
yeah, we've sort of normalized this pattern where, in many ways we've made this is a whole life thing where, the man and the woman, they get married, they form their new household, but for some reasons out of their control, like the entire economy being built around dual income households instead of an inflation and all sorts of wickedness out of our control. But, we've sort of established this normative pattern where the wife works and then they have kids, and often she might come home for a little bit, or, worst of all, they do daycare. She goes to school or continues to go to work. And, even a lot of this goes back to maybe she got herself into $60,000 or $100,000 of student loan debt that she now needs to work for 8 to 10 years just to pay off, as if that transaction makes any kind of economic sense in the household. So worst of all, you send your kids to daycare and then public school, and then, she just continues to work, builds her own career. The entire life builds basically on depending on this salary. But even a less bad example, we could say the mom understands, the wife understands. She comes home especially when kids are born, and she works at being a worker at home. But even like you're saying, when the kids grow up, this is a key point where I think we've missed the script, where ladies are so quick to go back to work and get another job. And a lot of the times they do this, I think, because it's like a social aspect where I'm going to go make friends at work. I'm going to build this whole life at work, instead of thinking, how can I continue to make sure that this home is the hub of care for my family? Like, if you're a woman in this situation, you might underestimate how big of a gift it would be to now turn around and pour it into your children as they're having children in this time.
And if your children are responsible and godly and kind to you, they're not going to tell you that they want that.
Right.
It's going to be hard for them to do that.
If you say instead, okay, I'm now going to work, I'm going to help you in your home, I'm going to help with young kids, it's going to be an intergenerational sort of household situation. We're going to actually build our lives around this, where it's not going to be like we're just going to accumulate more and more things, go on more and more vacations, do more and more of that kind of thing. We're actually going to pour in and build a life that is integrated across the generations, so that Titus 2 is happening. The older women are teaching the younger women to be workers at home. Think about Paul's qualifications for enrolling women in the care of the church, widows. Yeah. He's talking about women who have washed the feet of the saints, who have been good examples of wives and mothers in their household to their children, and also within the church. So there's this serving the church element of other women in the church and other households in the church. And all of a sudden, you have this dynamic where it's pretty normal then that you wouldn't feel weird about now dying in that house.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that goes wrong here is that a lot of times, and I have counseled young families who are in this situation, where the couple's in their 30s or even 20s, but often, in their 30s, and their parents are approaching this end stage of their life in some cases. And it's the point where they're thinking, well, I know I need to honor my mother and father. God says that if I do that, I'll live long in the land. Like, it comes with a promise, okay? So I'm going to honor my mother and father. I'm going to make it clear to them that I love them. I want to take care of them. I want to make sure that they have the care they need as they age. And way too often, this is what happens. The older generation, it refuses to actually bend their life and now to turn back and serve the downstream generation. And so they either insist that this young family uproot everything and go move and be where they are, rather than the opposite, which would be come into my home. Yeah. And let me care for you here. Integrate you into the life of the grandchildren, and we'll serve you and we'll help you, and you'll serve. Like, parents are such a huge blessing, even as they're even in the last 5-10 years of life. Like, there's so much blessing from having grandparents there. Yeah. And way too often there's a resistance. And so I guess one thing that might be worth talking about is just, what do you do as a child, a grown child with your own family? How do you navigate that? Like, how do you honor your parents, but also understand like the limits of what you can do if they're unwilling, I guess?
I want to answer that question, but I want to go back to 1 Timothy because I think it's Pastor Wilson in his commentary on 1 Timothy, where part of the qualifications, if I'm remembering correctly, he's intimating in that passage that it will be expected that daughter-in-laws are going to be taking care of their in-laws at some point and their own parents. That's part of the qualifications of, did you care for your parents when they were dying? Then you will be qualified to be a widow that's cared for in the church. So to me, that's a vocation that God is giving you as a woman that you need to be preparing for, is caring for elderly people. Just that's something I think about. That's something I read about. I'm constantly evaluating our schedules as families. Do I have time for my parents? My mom's coming over for dinner tonight. kind of unexpectedly, she's popping over. My dad's out of town. I want my schedule free enough that that's possible.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to comment on that because as we've walked through some of this with our family members who are struggling with caring for other elderly family members, I've noticed that if you're not willing to accept it as a vocation God has given you, it's not going to work because it's not efficient. It's going to get in the way of your job and your social life and your marriage.
Yeah.
And if it's not a vocation, you're going to fuss at it.
Yeah, 15 kid activities that are like constantly on happening. And we get it. We have kids in piano lessons and all sorts of things. But yeah, the life needs to be built around this hub.
Yes, correct. So sorry, I wanted to answer that question. But your other question, how to honor your parents when they may not have the same view of end of life as you, is that essentially?
Well, yeah, and even just if they're like, you're building a life, you're trying to build, you're working hard on business, a lot of the things, you get rooted in a place and a lot of your life is there. And then you're thinking like your kids are back east somewhere or your kids, your parents are back somewhere else often that, because we're not growing up in these intergenerational communities often with the gravity to keep multiple generations, which is another topic we might take up.
Yeah.
But the demand or the expectation becomes often with older parents is like, no, you move here. Like I'm not moving there. You move here. And the often the alternative is either like they go in a rest home there.
Yeah.
That costs $60,000 a year or more and rack up a bunch of debt or spend the entire inheritance or the younger generation completely uproots for 5-10 years, whatever, and it just disrupts the actual organic development across the generation. So how do you deal with that? Is it okay to say, I will honor you, this is what I can do, but I also need to raise my children? And how do you balance that?
Because it creates like the instability of the family that's still growing sort of a thing. Yeah. So I think you've really helped me in understanding like there's a lot that we're not going to change about the generations before us. Our main job isn't necessarily to force them into the way we want things to be. Our main job is to make sure it's going to be different for us and our kids. And that's kind of helped take the weight of like, because sometimes I can feel like I have to be persuasive for them to want to do this. And if my house is ever messy, they're not going to ever want to come live here. And that sort of a thing.
Yeah.
But I just feel like I think you're right. I think, and I talked to Laila Lawler about this. When my grandma lived with my parents for a time. And so she would spend several days a week with me and my kids. And then she'd live with my parents. And that was, shall we say, like boot camp 101 for me putting some of this into practice a couple years ago. And, so I talked to Laila about it because her mother passed away in their home and she lived with them for years. I think Laila had 8 kids, homeschooled them all, and her mom lived there for a big chunk of that before she was even sick.
Yeah.
And so I just was kind of saying like, how much do we bend towards the older generations and how much do they bend towards us?
Yeah.
And I'm really trying to not be mean here, but she basically said they need to bend to you because you're doing them a favor by not sticking them in a corner of the room somewhere where strangers are totally taking care of them. The problem with that is that most older people would prefer to be taken care of by strangers
right.
than from our kids, than from their children or grandchildren in our case. So I think that we're so like backwards.
Yeah.
I can't even fathom that. Like I have a hard time thinking about that. But I think when you start to realize the household was an economy where people's clothing on their back and the food on their plate came from the work that happened in that home, older people understood there was not retirement seasons of life. They were they were an active part. Even if grandma is sitting in the corner blind, she can at least bounce the baby on the knee.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You're going from one vocation to the next.
Correct.
And it's the vocation that God gives you in that stage.
Correct.
Creationally and in the nature of your being, because you have a season where your vocation is to be a young child.
Correct.
Learning to obey mom and dad. You have a vocation as an adolescent, beginning in this liminal stage to work through transition from childhood to adulthood. You have this seeking a spouse stage. And you have a vocation that's different in each of those that grows on top of the other. And what we've done is we've sort of put the finish line, instead of at death, we've put the finish line at retirement or at kids empty nesting.
Yeah. And
then the finish line is I get there and then I'm free to pursue my hobbies, basically. Yeah. And here's the thing. Hobbies are great. Actually, a huge part of vocation of grandparents is inviting children into their hobbies. Like, it's a blessing that my dad will do fun things with
He's going to build a treehouse.
He's going to build a treehouse. Your dad has brought the kids in. We've camped. We've done some of the things that they do. So it's not that hobbies are bad. It's that the aim of the vocation in that stage of life ought to be pouring into the next generations and finishing well.
Yeah.
And being an older man or older woman who can instruct and help, and not be transitioning into a self-serving phase where I still attempt to make the center me. Well, no, the center should be we're pouring downstream. And honestly, I think the lie is that there will be bigger blessing and more joy in making it me, like doing my me-cation, where now I've hit the finish line, instead of the genuine, like, how thick of a joy is it to be able to, like, be, have built hopefully some productive property yourself and durable wealth, and you've been doing well, and you have lessons to pass on, and now you're going to turn and invest and pour into. And, like, seriously, think about this. Maybe that means you've paid your house off. You've got your house free and clear, and you were able to take advantage of, like, the fact that property prices back in the 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s were like a good house was 4 to 6 times the annual salary. 4x, I think, was about normal in the 80s for, like, how much you made on average versus how much a house cost. Well, it's passing 8 times now, 8x, meaning that it costs 8 years of the average salary now or more to purchase a house. So you've got this free and clear house now that's worth $500,000 or whatever. And maybe it's you team up with your downstream generations and say, we're going to sell this house. We're either going to sell this house and move in with you, or maybe even help buy property that could be conducive to multi-generational living. Or we're going to say, and this is kind of crazy, I think, to people because they don't think this way anymore. It's like, or we're going to say, look, we have a house with 8 bedrooms now.
Yep.
We're going to move to the ground floor, whatever room. You guys move in. This is your house now.
Yeah.
And the kids grow up here. Like, think of the intergenerational progress you could make if we did that.
Yeah.
And actually then, like, one of my goals for my kids, this is a pie in the sky goal at this point. I'm not even financially close to it, just so that nobody knows. But I would love to be able to hand on, particularly to my sons, houses that are paid off and productive.
Yeah.
Each. And hopefully then marry my daughter off to someone else in the church who's doing the same thing. But you know what I'm saying? Like, and maybe that won't happen, might not be possible. But we're, 31. I'm 31. How old are you now? 31? No, you're not my age yet. I'm way older than Lexi. I'm 30. Venerable. I'm significantly older. Like, those extra 10 months of experience that I have, sometimes she's just in awe of the wisdom I've accumulated. No, but I mean, that's where I'm thinking now as the head of the house, thinking, man, I would love to be able to do that. Well, probably won't be able to when they're 20 or something, but man, that's how these British estates worked.
Yeah.
Primogeniture, they handed on the whole estate to the firstborn son so that it would stay together, often with an endowment that would help pay for the continuation and maintenance of the property. Yeah. And we don't think that way anymore. Now we think in terms of retirement account to get me and my wife through to when we die. And hopefully we don't spend our last dollar before that day. And if there's anything left over, well, that's great. The kids can have it, or I'll donate it to something. Instead of thinking, how can we as a family, and think of yourself as part of this stream of a family, get a foothold in a community for the sake of Christ and his kingdom and my people over a time. And everything changes when you get that switch right. All of a sudden, it makes total sense that you would be thinking about dying well in the land that is now in the hands of responsible heirs that you've trained up. and you know that there are going to be generations of Sauvés or whoever it is dying in this house or dying on this land.
We definitely need to do an entire episode on wealth, because now I want to talk about.
Yeah, let's. I know I'm tempted to.
So no,
we
let's.
will.
But
we'll talk about that at like the office. We'll take the office.
There you go.
And
That's
wealth
a good way to go about it.
We hadn't thought about that yet, so
the
there you go.
junk drawer.
Yeah, the junk drawer.
No,
episode
not
of the
really.
office.
Not really.
No,
Okay.
it is central. Financial planning is central.
Yeah. So I do want to say too, though. One of the things we've definitely learned while watching this take place in both sides of our families is there's 2 pictures of a grandma in Proverbs.
Yeah.
There's one where she's a crown and one where she's a curse.
Yeah.
And I think it's Nancy Wilson that talks about, if you want to be the one that wears a crown, you have to start as a young woman who can wear a crown.
That's right.
And this is crazy, but like Queen Elizabeth, the current queen, I don't remember how heavy that crown is. It's like 40
heavy.
to 60 pounds though. She literally
40. I got to look this up. That's a lot. I feel like that's a lot. 20? Okay, well,
she
I'll look
had
up.
to practice though. She had to like weightlift this crown before she could wear it for, I think it was her coronation or there was a dinner before her coronation. I don't remember. I love the queen. But like, I knew that already from the Proverbs before. And then when I read that about the queen, I was just like shocked, because this means in a way it is exercising muscles to be able to wear your crown well for your kids and your grandkids.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also like,
it's just short of 5 pounds, by the way.
what?
But put 5 pounds.
No.
It is 4 pounds, 12 ounces. But
no,
put it on your
not.
head.
I have to go look it up.
That
in the
was
book
her
that I was
coronation
reading.
crown. Here's the thing, though. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a lot. If you've ever put a 5-pound dumbbell on your head, and do that for hours, your neck would hurt.
They talk about how
train.
physically fit she is between wearing that and also just being able to be hospitable and shaking hands and talking all the time. That she is very physically fit for that,
I mean,
especially at her age.
How old is she? And she's still putzing through her duties.
There's a book, Long Live the Queen. It's really interesting because it talks about her physical and spiritual habits that have kind of formed her into the woman that she is and the queen that she is, and queens we should all be.
Queens, well, not me.
Me. No, okay, so, but I also, like what you were saying earlier about, when I look at the Proverbs, the way that grandparents should value their grandkids, I don't see that. I don't see that in a lot of the previous generations, because wealth did flow so freely, they would rather be away from them than.
Yeah, I mean, it's inconvenient.
Yeah, it's very inconvenient.
And by the way, we're not just like my mom, her mom might actually listen to this someday. We're not like complaining about our parents right now.
No,
we're talking about the aggregate of lots of.
I mean, we've seen Twitter threads though, like Twitter threads recently where it is very, very normal. You go ahead.
Yeah, you see Twitter threads where you've got like people telling their kids like, "Oh, we're intentionally going to give away this inheritance.
Yeah,
we're going to give it to somebody else, like to a foundation, because we don't want to give you any money. We want to teach you to be self-reliant.
Yeah,
we want to see. Here's the problem, and I'm gonna give like a Dave Ramsey complaint right now. A lot of the Dave Ramsey type generation, they don't reckon with, I think, and I'm going to say 2 things, and I might add more to this, but there are 2 mistakes that can tend to be made, and I'm not like knocking all of Dave Ramsey's advice or anything. No,
we've remained fairly debt free from Dave Ramsey.
It's kind of like elementary math is Dave Ramsey stuff, but some of the intergenerational stuff, I think gets lost. Where on the one hand, I think a lot of baby boomer generations underestimate the degree to which things have changed in the world since they grew up. Many of those changes the direct result of their political choices.
Yeah.
So the baby boomer generation, and to a lesser degree, I would say, the generation before, and then also we've continued in this decline, have made political choices and economic decisions that have led to a world where it is much more financially difficult to build durable wealth and actually to be self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. The entire system bends towards dependence now. And the house example is one good example of that, to where it's much more difficult today. You cannot be a 21-year-old college grad going out and expecting to have a living wage that can support a family of 5 and own your own home, car, everything.
Well, another example of this is, I think it was Eric who was talking about that other Twitter thread from an unbelieving friend of his who was like, you want to know why the divorce rate is going through the roof? Because the wife is home all day with the kids. The husband is working his butt off, paying like a normal job. In addition to that, trying to work more so she can stay home. They're trying to pay down all their debt. They come home. Grandparents are constantly gone. No one's ever willing to help with the kids. Tension is through the roof all of the time because they're just trying to make ends meet and they don't have help. And I think that's normal for a lot of people, totally normal. Yeah. And we have to realize as Christians, that's a real tension because we're not created to live that way. We're not created to live independently. And so I don't look at that and say, oh, just be a Christian and do it the Christian way. It's a whole worldview package that you have to then be importing into the Christian church. You cannot just be a Christian and then remain independent and separate from the other generations. It's not going to work. That is a natural consequence of sin. Yeah,
God's blessing and curse flows through generations. Yeah. That's a biblical theme.
Correct. God's
wisdom leads to its blessing through the generations, and the opposite's also true. So I think a lot of the Dave Ramsey generation I mentioned that, number one, they underestimate the degree to which things have changed economically. And then number two, they are not thinking properly in terms of often inheritance thinking for their children. They think that, and this is another category of that first error, but they think that they're actually helping their kids by not helping them sometimes. They're like, oh, we're helping them. No one helped me, which may or may not be true. Okay, may or may not be true. But the question isn't whether anyone helped you, it's whether they should. What does God say it should look like to be a godly grandparent and to be to be going into that stage of your life? So when we talk about the deathbed, obviously we're talking about more than that.
Yeah, there's a lot.
We're talking about ending your life well and being able to look back as an older person downstream in the generations and say, wow, I was so blessed and God blessed me. I was able to hand on help to the next generation. So I'm confident that my children and my children's children will continue. It's like Psalm 128 ends with this benediction, this blessing, where it begins with how does it start? Psalm 128. It goes, bless the man that fears Jehovah.
Okay. I had a different one.
And then walketh in his ways. Thou shalt eat of thy hands' labor and be prospered all the days. Like a vine with fruit abounding in thy house, thy wife is found, and like olive plants, thy children compassing the table round. Lo the man. Shall this blessedness attend? For Jehovah out of Zion shall to thee his blessing send. Thou shalt see Jerusalem prosper all thy days till life shall cease. Thou shalt see thy children's children, unto Israel be peace. So the whole psalm is aimed at this whole life.
Yeah.
Where you're having children, and then at the end of your life, all your days till life ceases, you'll be able to see God's blessing. You'll see your children's children, unto Israel be peace, and Israel being biblically, theologically the church. So, I mean, unto the people of God be peace. And instead of that, we've so often truncated that and said financial literacy even is aimed at me being able to have enough dollars to finish out my life. Well, sure, of course it is.
Yeah.
But what about this? What if you actually helped the next generations prepare with the understanding that you won't have to worry about whether there's enough dollars in your bank account because you have people there who are going to care for you.
Yes, correct.
Right? You have people, and you've set those people up so that they will care for you.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't matter if your wife to live to be 250 because she's going to have people to take care of her.
Yeah.
Like, this is the key error, I think, in this kind of thinking where what we've done is we're thinking about, I need enough dollars to care for me and my wife, instead of thinking, I need to prepare and care for my people so that they will be there. The people are the resource.
Yeah.
Even more than the dollars.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The people are the resource. And I think, too, where I was going with that whole grandkids thing is we see in Proverbs that the grandchildren are a joy. So part of what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about preparing a household to invite our family, our parents and grandparents back to, is, are my children a joy? Yeah. Am I disciplining them? Am I doing my duties so that they can be a joy, so that my house can be a joy?
Yeah.
Or am I pushing off? Because I think the flip side of this is our generation being so stressed out in that whole like mommy
anxious
chaos junk.
Mommy needs wine. Mommy needs a vacation.
We
Mommy
just
hates her kids.
we don't want to finish our duties, so we just want to want our parents to rescue us in a way and then just like kind of dump all of our responsibility on them. So for example, when we went to St. George with your parents recently, that was super fun, by the way.
Yeah, it was.
We'd never been down there before. And
and they like paid for the rental house and we all hung out. It was great.
It was really cool.
Yeah.
But something I did not want to like show up and be like, okay, feed my family of 7 for a week. Woohoo!
Yeah, we're going to go out to eat 3 times a day. It's going to cost $18,000 for this week.
So I just knew like it's my duty. This is my family. I'm going to love my in-laws well. I'm going to make sure I have the basics of every single meal while we're there done for us. So we can cook that or we can go out if we all want to go out.
And we're not going to be like fussy about it either.
No, we're not going to be fussy about it. No. Yeah. So that was just like one small example that I am really trying to start to think practically about this. Or like when my dad's out of town a lot. I don't want my mom to ever feel like she can't just pop over unexpectedly for dinner.
Like we're gonna be
because
annoyed.
Lexy is so like she can't even make her own ends meet. How is she going to deal with me? Like I don't want that to be the way they view us. Yeah. So just like as you're training your kids, as you're doing your duties in your home, can you do it peacefully and can you do it in a way that's a blessing to others and that your children are a blessing to others? Yeah. So you're disciplining them to honor and respect your parents.
Yes, exactly. So, we're all working together.
Yeah.
So the vision we're painting for you is that we have these intergenerational homes, and there are going to be examples where this doesn't work. People are in different states, whatever. But this is just like, here's an ideal vision we're going to give you. Let's intergenerational homes working together to build durable legacy of faith and even wealth that's productive so that we can love our neighbor well, love our immediate neighbors in our family, and then working out, love our church well, have a foothold in areas so that the witness of the gospel will continue through the generations because Christians are still going to be able to be there, right? This is just general kingdom thinking, intergenerational legacy thinking. And so when you get to the end of your life, let's say you've got this ideal home and you're 85, the Lord's granted you many years, and so you're because you honored your mother and father, and so you lived long in the land. You're 85, 90 years old.
The best health advice you can find out there.
That's right. It has nothing to do with exercise or eating. It's honor your father and mother. That's the first thing. Fear the Lord, honor your mother and father. So what are some practical things? Getting very practical. What are some practical elements of deathbed hospitality as maybe that's your mother and you're looking at your mother and father in this situation, in this ideal situation? What arts of homemaking should you be prepared for so that you can help them die well?
Okay, so first of all, I think just really basic healthcare. Like if you're still stressing out about a fever, you're going to have issues with like somebody literally dying in one of the bedrooms in your house.
Yeah.
So just start understanding like basic physiology, how to care for sick people. There used to be, until not too long ago, every single cookbook essentially that was published had a section on diets for the sick.
Yeah.
Specifically with elderly people, something to consider is that as they get older, their digestive tract is not able to absorb as many nutrients, but their actual nutrient need increases as they get older. So you do need to kind of think in terms of, especially if they're sick, like what is going to really nourish their body. And that's why a lot of sick food is like custards and toast and milk and bone broth and like meat pieces. So no vegan diets for the elderly.
Or anybody else.
Yeah. I think too, something that I really learned having my grandma around, is they just have like really unusual, and maybe this is also because they're not used to being in a family, but her eating habits were very different from ours. So when I was out and about with her, I had to anticipate her being hungry. And so I had snacks. I had separate, and I know my mom did the same thing too. Yeah. We had snacks for grandma, just because she got hungry at different times than we do. And I think some of that is physiological and some of it's just like different habits than a normal family. But like, don't bristle at that. If you're bristling at it, you're not being hospitable.
Yeah.
But learn to adapt to them in some ways as well.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
It's it's like we're dealing with loving people. It's like practically, there's not going to be this rainbows and butterflies. And
no.
People are difficult. Like we're sinners. We have our idiosyncrasies. We're weird.
We could tell you some funny stories about my grandma.
Right. We could. We will cover over her. It's like, if you're loving anybody, you will have to
Yeah.
give, and you just have to choose, I'm going to serve them.
Well, and it's like Rosaria says in here, like hospitality is always messy. And I think that's another thing that I have been thinking about a lot recently is if you are being hospitable in this way, it means you won't be able to be hospitable in other ways.
Sure. Yeah. Something's got to give. You don't have endless resources. You're not going to be able to do all the things that you wanted necessarily in the moment.
Yeah.
We're talking about long, durable joys.
Yeah. Yeah.
So basic medical care is very important. This is a good art of homemaking for a woman to learn in the home.
Yeah.
To be competent medically to handle sneezes, sniffles, care, but also then, understanding that as people die, they're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
I think one aspect of doing this well is the mental and spiritual fortitude to be able to be cheerful, be a rock that people can lean on and not be so emotionally brittle that like, I flee the room, I faint, I cry, I make a big deal, I make it all about myself and how hard this is for me.
Yeah.
Love them well, like be strong. Why? Because you know the Lord. You know your like Christian family is what we're hopefully describing. Like that my dad is going to go to his rest with the Lord. He's going to be gathered to his people.
Yeah. I remember your mom even telling me when her sister died, she knew it was a matter of minutes essentially. And she had left the room because she was emotional, but she realized like, that's not loving of me to leave my sister in there alone. And she went back in with her and she passed away, you know? And I know your mom's personality. And I know how much courage that took for her to do that, but she loved her so much that she wasn't going to make the last minutes about herself.
Right.
She was making it about her sister.
Yeah, that's right. So loving your dying parent or your dying family member well requires fortitude on your part. You're going to be strong and courageous. You are going to help them finish the race well. I think this is also why practically one of the aspects of deathbed hospitality that we need to recover is like, there's a reason families shouldn't be singing gay Hillsong songs all the time.
Oh,
learning stupid, vapid songs about, ephemeral, emotional things, and actually, like, learn the Psalms, learn hymns, learn how to sing them a cappella, and so that you can actually, so you can sing Psalm 128 at their deathbed.
Okay, so what's cool about Rosaria's story is her mom was with them for a period of time, and then there was a separate section where she was in some sort of home with care for a time, and when she was in both situations, essentially, they were singing Psalms over her nonstop, to the point where her husband was bringing in hymnals so that the nurses who were coming into the home hospice, they had psalters so they could open them and sing with her. And when she was in the home, one of Rosaria's daughters was playing the hymns on the piano then. And it was through I think it was Psalm 123 when her mom essentially asked her, like, do I know the shepherd?
Psalm 23?
Yeah, Psalm 23.
Okay.
Psalm 23.
Yeah, I was going to bring that one up, so that's good. Yeah.
But so like that's such a good example of the Psalms deal with the entire spectrum of human emotions. So there has to be something on there dealing with deathbed.
Right.
Hillsong's not going to deal with that necessarily. Actually, they're going to act like it doesn't exist at all.
And the thing is too, Hillsong's not built for a cappella congregational singing.
Yeah.
So doesn't lend itself well to this. It's built for like virtuosic, breathy female vocal performances with a big band.
Yeah.
They're built for guitars, and it's not the same as music that was built for singing. People singing a cappella, which good hymnals and psalters, that's what they were built for. So it's like literally, here's one. If you don't know where to start, I say this to everybody who's new to the Psalms. Learn the 1650 Scottish Psalter setting of Psalm 23 to the tune of Amazing Grace. That's it. You already could do this. Mm-hmm. Like you could Google it right now. You could just literally Google 1650 Scottish Psalter, Psalm 23. The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want. He makes me down to lie.
My grandma told me my entire upbringing, if you memorize Psalm 23, I'll give you $20 since I was like 5. Yeah. I never could memorize it. The second we set that whole thing, the whole thing.
Has she given you $20 yet? Babe, I'll give you $20. No. With inflation, let's adjust. I'll give you $100.
No, but we memorize a lot more scripture that way. And the Psalms specifically are so comforting for the spectrum of human emotions. It helps us understand how to deal with them.
Yeah. So I think that's an aspect that we need to make sure that we're learning well, so that we have songs. Like we say at our church that we want to sing psalms that would be fitting, so that the saints are equipped with songs that would be fitting for them to sing on their wedding day or their dying day. So they're not flippant or vapid. They're serious and weighty. And they cover, I'm not saying they're not emotional, because good songs are also emotional. They cover all of the joys and sorrows and lament and anger, like the imprecations in the Psalms.
Even some of them are like they're like secular in nature in the way that David's writing ballads to national heroes. That's not necessarily spiritual.
Right. They're not only about pure theology.
Yes, correct.
In fact, that's one of the errors, I think, of churches that only sing even good hymns, but not psalms, is that because they look at the Psalms and they're like, some of the ones we sing, I'm trying to think of a good example of this, where you find yourself singing about things that you wouldn't always. Obviously the imprecatory Psalms, like Lord, crush their teeth in their mouth, but you find yourself singing about, think of Psalm 128. There are parts of that if Hillsong were doing a sanitized version of it, they would cut out. Like they would cut out the part about unto Israel be peace, But what you're doing is you're actually learning this whole biblical vocabulary of not just theology, but applied theology, how to lament, how to express joy. So any last?
Yeah, I just wanted to read this little section. I don't know if you have any comments on it, but it's about the church's role in recovering this, because I often talk about how I would love to have a hospital wing here with enough women equipped in basic medical care to care. Like if there's a family in our church that their household can't do it, but their mother or father wants to come really badly and be taken care of, I would love if we had the setup that we could volunteer our time to do that at the church.
Used to be the ones that built the hospitals. There's a reason for that.
So I just wanted to read this little section. This is also from Bob Coutinho's book. But the church has no reason to cower, for the church knows the future in light of God's promises, sees the possibility for healing from the most unexpected places, and holds a view of the sick as members of a community who, by being loved and loving others, still have important roles to play despite being infirm and in bed. If medicine is to be used wisely and the sick are to be restored to health, the church must step out of the shadows and bear witness to what it knows.
It's very good. Yeah, this is not... all of the arts we're talking about, they are household arts, but they will not be recovered fully, but in the context of
church community,
thriving local church communities that are thick communities that are interested in believing the whole scriptures, believing that the scriptures speak to the whole domain of human existence fruitfully and profitably, and believing that by simple faith and walking in obedience to them as Christians, that we will see them work. That wisdom will actually work. It won't just be like, my sins are forgiven, yay. It'll be, my sins are forgiven, and God is making me a new human and actually teaching me how to be a human being. Yeah. So
I think if you want to read another book about this, God's Hotel is a good example. It's written by an unbeliever, but she's using Hildegard van Binghams' nursing notes, essentially, from the medieval times, and Hildegard was a Christian. She was a Christian nurse. And so it's funny because she's applying all of these Christian principles of medicine and ethics and just basic charity towards sick people. And her book was written to try to prove to the government that this old way of doing medicine was more efficient, which I believe it is. But there were so many helpful principles that I got in that book in regards to caring for people like Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, and Dr. Merrymaker. Like when someone is sick, you need to be thinking of, are you feeding them well? Do they have enough rest? And is it a beautiful time for them? Because the time of sickness is still a time of life. You don't get to rush through it. Yeah. It still needs to be enjoyed. Edith Schaefer talks a lot about that too in What is a Family? That is a fabulous book on this topic of the household being a shelter through times of sickness. So
that's very good. Well, thanks for those resources, babe. And thanks for listening in, everybody. We appreciate your ears being lent to this podcast. We hope that God blesses you in your home as you seek to recover the lost arts of homemaking, not householdery, but homemaking, and that you would see the Lord build a productive household in your family through your generations. May you see your children's children, and may they be blessed.